Farang, From YouTube to Jail. A true story written by John Andrews. Chapter 1. Pattaya My First Time. Every now and then, there would be a big boxing fight in the US that would bring myself and several others to pile around my best friend's house to watch. My best friend John and I would stay up until the early hours of Sunday morning, and it was always the best time ever, filled with food, beer, and massive banter. On this Saturday night in March 2003, instead of watching an undercard before the main event, John put on a video of his time in Pattaya, Thailand, with a few other friends. Walking around the different SWA with a video camera was a real eye-opener. The sounds, the women openly and freely dancing on tables in open bars, having an absolute blast, with John and a few others joining in the fun. John also showed me the size of his hotel room, which he had rented for just £40 a week. For someone like me who, at 29, had only ever gone to the US on holiday, it was unthinkable to get a place like that for a single night, let alone a week. Everything seemed like what I was looking for, the price of accommodation, food, and the always hot weather. I decided then that Thailand was for me, not just for a holiday but as a place to live. I had no real trade or skill to go live in the US, and after 8 years of trying since I was 21, all I had encountered was failure. What I spent in the US for 1 week would last a month in Thailand, and I just wanted to leave the UK. I've never felt settled here. I always felt like I had a bit of rabbit in me, always wanting to live in another country. So, I decided there and then to quit my job and leave. I sold my car, got my final payment from work in very early April 2003, booked my flight, and was thrilled with excitement at the thought of going to Thailand to live and make a new life. My best friend John was absolutely stoked for me and advised me to be careful of scammers and not to get too involved with the bar scene since I was going there to live. I was still living with my folks, so I didn't have to give up much to make this move. Everything happened so quickly, with no real plan of action. My passport still had a couple of years left, so I was okay in that regard. My dad gave me a lift to Manchester Airport. I think I gave him £20 for the diesel. This time felt different. I had tried to make it work at least 3 times in the US, but without being able to work legally, my hands were tied. I even tried a little car trading for cash in the US, but to no avail. At that time, everything in the US seemed designed for people who had all the correct legal documents, which I simply did not. I would have never passed their point system, not having a real trade or skill they could find useful. Catching the flight on Qatar Airways, I was just hyper. The flight lasted about 12 hours in total, including a 2-hour layover in Doha. When I got off the plane in Bangkok, there was a long walk to Thai immigration that seemed to take about a quarter of an hour. The queue at immigration was just mental. I was used to getting through US immigration in 15 minutes, but this took 2 hours straight, and it was tedious. When I walked out of the terminal at Suvarnabhumi Airport, like a moron, I had my coat on, and a wall of heat hit me like a furnace. The temperature and humidity were insane and very daunting. I was surrounded by taxi drivers all saying 1,500 baht until one said 1,200 baht. So I agreed, gave the money to a young woman who took my bag and put it in the boot, and I sat in an air-conditioned taxi for the 2-hour journey to Pattaya. Looking out the window, I was in awe of even simple things like 5 people on a motorbike. Mum, Dad, and kids all at once, bikes massively overloaded, and lots of traffic noise. The taxi dropped me off mid-beach road. I had no clue where I was going to stay. I started to walk up a small side road, which Thais call SWAs. This one was SWA 8. I stopped less than 20 meters from a hotel called the Flipper Lodge. I thought, that looks good enough. Went into the very well air-conditioned reception, put my bag on the floor, and paid for my room, which was about £11 per night. The exchange rate back then was 60 baht per pound, but if you exchanged your money there, you could get 70 baht per pound. I booked 7 days for the price I would pay in the US for 1 night. I was escorted to my room, and the very polite young man carried my bag. As soon as I got into my room, he pointed to a table with a drawer and said, "Condoms." I gave him 20 baht, and he left me. I had breakfast in the Flipper Lodge Hotel, which consisted of Thai noodles, a vegetable dish, and a small side dish of fruit. The whole meal cost just about £1.50. I walked out of my hotel onto Suan 8, and it was just bedlam. The Thai annual tradition of Songkran was in full force, with wave after wave of people shooting water at each other with squeezy guns. It was chaos, and I had never seen so many people having the time of their lives. I walked down towards Beach Road, where it was a wall of people all having the time of their lives. I have not experienced anything like this anywhere in the world before, certainly not in the UK or the US. So many Thai people were rubbing what seemed to be white powder on all the foreigners or Farang's faces. The atmosphere was electric. I spent the next couple of hours walking up and down several swars, stopping off at the odd 7-Eleven for water and visiting a few small beer bars for a Chang beer. Everything seemed otherworldly to me, and I loved it. I realized there and then that Thailand was for me, and I would stop at nothing to live there for the rest of my life. Such a positive and friendly atmosphere. Even every British person was smiling from ear to ear. The atmosphere was that good. After several hours of walking, I was tired and decided to take a rest in front of my hotel, where there was a little collection of beer bars all under the same roof. While I sat there with my beer on the step from the bar to the street, watching Songkran still in full flow, a young lady in her mid-20s sat next to me. She was pretty, with a very petite frame and large breasts. She introduced herself as June, with the biggest smile, and I told her I had never been to Thailand before and could not believe how fantastic everything was. At this point, she took my hand and said, "Come with me." She led me halfway up Suan 8 and across Suan 7 onto Pattaya Central Road to a big supermarket called Tops. She went in, bought a few items, and said, "You pay," which I agreed to. We then went to a small internet cafe underneath the stairs at Tops where her friends worked. There were 3 of us chatting for about an hour before June took us back to the bar opposite my hotel. She was clearly meant to be around the bar because she didn't want to or go anywhere else, especially not to another bar. Around 4 a.m., when everything had gone very quiet, we both went back to my hotel opposite. We both had a shower together, after which she wore a long Florida t-shirt I owned, and we just got into bed together, cuddled, and went to sleep. The next day, she took me to where she lived, a tiny little room where 2 other friends of hers also lived. I was shocked. This place was tiny, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet. June went to shower while I spoke with her friends. After that, June took me to the reception of the building and said, "Can you pay?" I asked, "Pay what?" and she replied, "Rent." I coughed up 1,500 baht to the lady behind the desk, and June thanked me. I was a little shocked but not that bothered because I was happy to help her. June took me back to my hotel, took all her clothes off, and told me to do the same. I don't really need to go into more detail than that. We spent every waking hour together over the next week, and it was the best time ever. Most of the time was spent inside the small bar opposite my hotel. She always seemed loyal to that place and would only walk down to Pattaya Beach for an hour now and then with me. One night, while we were asleep, her phone went off. She said her friend Newt was in trouble and we needed to go see her straight away. I got onto a motorbike taxi, which I hated because I felt so unsafe, and we did about a mile journey to Newt's place. When we got there, Newt had packed her bags and was waiting for us. At this point, her boyfriend, from whom she had just split, came out with a few of his friends, and I realized I was there to be intimidated. I stared at them. They stared at me. I could not believe June had led me into what seemed like an ambush. This was the first time I was like, what the hell is going on here? I told her to get out of my room and go back to her bar, which she did. I couldn't sleep. It was about 1 a.m., so I got dressed and went out of my hotel, where I saw June sitting there with another guy. I thought, wow, how much have I been had here? She left the guy and apologized to me. But as far as I was concerned, all trust was gone, and Thailand, especially Pattaya, seemed like a place I wanted to get out of straight away. The next day, I went to a travel agent along Suan 8 and booked my flight home, leaving a few days later. The problem with June was that when we arrived at her friend's place, she gave me no warning, no idea what was waiting for me. It was something I had never experienced in my life. I had always felt with girls I had been with in the UK that they had my back. This was foreign to me, how quickly she was willing to throw me under the bus. I also realized in my haste to leave the UK for Thailand, I did not even have close to enough money to stay there for maybe 4 months maximum. Once I got back to the UK, I realized I should have stayed for a few months and not let the experience with June affect me that much. Chapter 2. My first long stay. Over the next decade, I went to Thailand many times, each time trying to stay longer and longer, a few months each time, and started getting used to the procedure of doing visa extensions after my first 30 days at tourist immigration on Suan 5, Jomtien. I also started to watch an awful lot of footage about Pattaya on platforms like YouTube. Bangkok 112 was about the biggest and best out there, with views on each video easily reaching into the millions just weeks after posting. On a 2-month stay in October and November 2015, I got a cheap budget action camera and started doing a few walks and other content around Pattaya that I thought I would like. On my channel called Pattaya, by the end of that trip, I realized this could be something that could keep me out there for far longer. After a few months, my videos had gotten to 100,000 views and several hundred subscribers. By this time, YouTube allowed me to monetize my videos and started putting ads on my content. After a few months, I got my first YouTube payment of about £90. I was blown away. That gave me a different level of confidence and direction for what to do with the channel, my life, and my future in Thailand, which at this time was my only waking thought. I bought a small Sony pocket camera that had a good zoom and could shoot crisp, clear high-definition footage, which was exactly what I needed. It was smallish and did not stand out, which is required for recording footage and making content. Over the next 3 trips, each lasting between 2 and 3 months over the next couple of years, I would be in Pattaya, posting 2 videos every day to my channel. I watched my income grow from £150 a month to £600 a month, which made my attitude single-minded towards what I had to do to stay and make a living. It was not uncommon for an occasional video to get 500,000 views or more, which would bring in $500 just for a single video. I was absolutely pumped by this, realizing that only my lack of motivation would be my biggest enemy, but I thought, screw it, I'm going to go all in with this and not look back. On my next trip, I was there to stay, and nothing or no one would stop me. Fast forward to 2018, I was working in a warehouse and miserable, as I had been for the last 3 years, with the only ray of light being my growing YouTube channel for a Thai income. At this point, I had just over 11,000 subscribers and several million views, which made me realize now was the time to go all in and make the big leap. I had been drinking a lot in the UK to deal with how unhappy I was living there, so in February 2018, I quit my job at the Tesco warehouse where I had worked since 2012. When I landed in Bangkok in mid-February, I had just £850 in my pocket and the knowledge that if it did not work now, it never would. I had an old laptop for editing, a small pocket camera good in low light, and a few changes of clothes. I made my way to Suan Honey, just off 2nd Road in Pattaya, and stayed at the Sawas Sunshine Hotel for 7,000 baht per month. Every day, I was out all day gathering footage to make 2 videos which I could upload to YouTube. For the first 3 months, this was bliss, and I had never been this happy since leaving school. At this point, I was 44 years old. Around that time, there was a YouTube ad apocalypse that halved every YouTuber's revenue. At this point, I was staying in accommodation off Suan Lenki called La Private for 200 baht per night, with a bed that felt like sleeping on concrete. I was down to my last £150 and realized I did not have the money to get a flight home. My revenue that month, which I had a week left to earn, was just £490, making me think, do I just get a flight home and move back in with my parents? I was always welcome there, so I decided then that I had failed with YouTube this time, but it was not my fault. It was due to Google limiting revenue for Thai night content, with some channels being outright banned. 2 days before my payment, which was usually on the 21st of each month, I got a message from my dad on Facebook saying people had contacted him about a PPI payment they got for me. I logged into my online banking expecting to see £100, but sure enough, £5,650 had gone into my account, and with my YouTube payment, I had over £6,000. I could have fainted. I had never been so over the moon in my entire life. I moved into a condo for 8,000 baht a month, purchased a brand new laptop, and upgraded from my cheap point-and-shoot to a Sony camcorder that shot the best quality HD footage I had ever seen. I still had £2,500 left and was very happy. Over the next 3 months, my life was bliss, and the increase in quality of footage made a difference in viewership, getting me back to between £700 and £900 each month, an amount I knew I could live on in Thailand. On September 19, 2018, I was told what revenue I would get that month, £1,058, which I would receive on the 21st of that month. That was the most I had ever received, and up to that point in September, I had already made an additional £1,060, which I would be paid in October, just 19 days into the month. I could feel big things happening to the channel, not 20 days into the month, and I was at a record earnings for the month. I got out of bed on the 20th of September and sat at my laptop in my condo, and like every other day, I logged into YouTube to check my revenue and the last 24 hours earnings. I could not find my YouTube account. Where had it gone? I opened my smartphone, and there was nothing. It said, "This channel does not exist." My mouth dropped when I realized my channel had been banned. The horror set in because I had no other way of earning a living in Thailand. From my many other trips, I only knew this, and this was my only income source. I contacted YouTube several times, but they simply did not want to know. They were cancelling all Thai YouTube channels that did night content, and some of my content was that. I would have been happy to delete that stuff, but I also put out a lot of content like restaurant reviews, weekly and monthly budget videos, day walkarounds, and general life in Pattaya. I think I was treated truly unfairly. A few days later, YouTube told me I would be getting £1,050. They were good enough to pay me that because the payment was finalized in their analytics. At this time, I realized what I had to do, leave Thailand and go back to the UK. It had been a great 8 months, possibly the best time of my life. I sold my desktop PC, which I had purchased from Jib in Pattaya, and sold my Sony camcorder. After paying for my flight home and receiving my final Google payment, I was returning to the UK with more money than I had when I left. Still, devastated, another Thai dream was over, and this time, realizing that any long-term stay was not possible due to a lack of ways to make revenue. Gutted does not come close to how I was feeling at this time. I was simply heartbroken. At the time of my channel being taken down, I had 34,500 subscribers and had amassed over 10 million views. I had weekly Facebook chats with both my parents for the time I was there, so they both realized how devastated I was when I got back home. Chapter 3. Back Home. Making plans. For the first year after my channel was taken down, I tried multiple times to get my channel back and failed. Fast forward 3 years to September 2021, and I had not tried for a couple of years. I filled in the same form I usually had to fill out to contact YouTube, using my original email address. My account always used 2 email accounts, but I never used the original one I opened my account with. I got up the next day, checked my email, and it said, "With new consideration, we have reactivated your account and apologize for any inconvenience we may have caused you." I was speechless. After all this time, I got it back. I went into my account, and there was my collection of over 300 videos I had created in over 3 years of being a YouTuber. All the videos were in low resolution, and it took YouTube over a year to get my videos processed back to high definition. After 2 weeks of my channel being back up, I received another email from YouTube informing me to update my tax information or they would withhold 30% from my revenue. I thought this was strange since my channel had been demonetized. So what revenue? I logged into my AdSense account, and the month of September 2018, where I had made over £1,060 up to the 19th of that month, was going to be paid to me. So, I went into my Google account, provided my national insurance number, and sure enough, the next month on the 21st of October, I was paid £1,063. At this point, I had been unemployed for 2 years and on universal credit, so getting that much was a real godsend. I realized I did not have any savings, just the new YouTube revenue, so going to Thailand there and then was not possible for me. I had to get a job and earn to get back and start again. My life in the UK at this point was miserable due to the pandemic. I had been unemployed for 2 years and felt there was no hope. But now that I had my channel back, I had something to hope for and look forward to. I just needed a job to start rebuilding my life, and sure enough, in late 2021, I got another job. I still had my SIA security license, so I got a job at the council offices in Stafford, which, to be honest, I kind of liked. The work was easy, and for 5 hours of my 8-hour shifts, I would be on my own after locking down the council buildings. I found it difficult to save any real money, and the YouTube payments I had received were long gone. I used them to upgrade my PC, which I had bought for a few quid, turning it into something capable of playing games. Despite the difficulty in saving, I managed to put away about £200 each month. I wasn't concerned that my channel wasn't monetized because I thought live streaming was for me. I had watched many live streamers just sitting around in bars doing next to nothing, some of them earning hundreds of dollars per stream, so I thought that was what I would do. I had to travel from Rugeley to Stafford each day, another expense I could hardly afford but necessary to keep my job. All the staff and people at Staffordshire Place 1 were very supportive of me. I had a super close friend named Sarah who worked there. Her advice was always spot on and well thought out. She was my best friend at the time, and I simply adored her. The months rolled by with my job, and I could see my savings increase. I knew, however, that I would be going to Thailand on a budget higher than the £850 I spent in 2018, but not massively so. With the equipment I needed, I would have maybe £2,500, and I had to make it work. If the channel stayed up, I was not going to leave under any circumstances. From my online checks, prices in Pattaya hadn't really changed. Most accommodations for a month were still cheap. I had a place I'd stayed before behind the Big C supermarket, which was cheap at 4,500 baht a month. I also knew that this time, I had to give up everything. After living in my car in 2019 for several months, I struggled to get my flat due to lack of money, but I moved into it on November 4, 2019, in Rugeley town centre above a chiropodist. When you've been homeless and find a place, you latch onto it far more, and for me, it became a very emotional place to live because of how grateful I was to have it. Leaving this place was a huge decision for me, and I knew it would be difficult, but Thailand's allure was too strong. It's all I could think about, and it made me so happy. From my 2018 visit, I had worked out that I would return to Thailand in August 2022, nearly 4 years since my last visit, a significant amount of time for me between visits. I knew by late August 2022, saving £200 a month would give me the £2,500 I wanted. For my flight and initial accommodation, I would sell the stuff I owned in the UK, like my gaming PC, my monitor, and a few other things I'd accumulated over the years in my flat. The only thing missing was a good enough smartphone for live streaming in Pattaya, one that I could use and charge at the same time, also considering the heat there as things like that can overheat. I decided on the Samsung Galaxy A34, which I would buy in Thailand for 20% cheaper than in the UK. I booked my flight from Manchester Airport for the 28th of August 2022. Over the next several weeks, I sold all my possessions, with my PC being the last to go, literally sold 24 hours before I left for Thailand. I waited for the best possible price and ended up with an extra £200 more than expected, which pleased me. Like other trips, my dad gave me a lift to the airport, again giving me the same 20 quid for the trip. No other time had I given up so much. This time, I was in my late 40s and knew my parents couldn't help me again. I had messed up this time. I was in real trouble, with no car to live in and no space at my parents' one-bedroom bungalow. Since my mid-40s, I had a condition called lymphedema in my lower legs and ankles, which left me with small open wounds that needed constant attention and dressing each day. I wasn't too concerned at the time since bandages in Thailand were super cheap and could be bought at any pharmacy. The journey to the airport was barely speakable and remained uneventful. I gave my dad my spare flat key and said goodbye. Chapter 4, Last Try, All or Nothing. I got off the plane in Bangkok and made my way downstairs to purchase a ticket at the bus terminal for 120 baht for the trip to Pattaya. Not bad at under £3 for a 100-mile trip. I got on the coach for the 2-hour journey, which was uneventful. I made my way to Suan and, as several times before, stayed at the New Star Inn Hotel, which had gone up to 500 baht a night. I paid for 10 nights with a 500 baht deposit. I always liked the New Star Inn Hotel because it was very clean and in a good location. For my first few days, I planned to just relax and enjoy myself. I went to the Hungry Hippo restaurant on Swa Bua Khao for a roast dinner and then to the 24-hour Metro Sports Bar on LK Metro, a favorite haunt of mine for many years, for some Guinness. That's how I spent the first several days in Thailand. I went to the Central Festival Mall on the 4th floor and bought my smartphone for 19,000 baht, which came with a couple of different cases, a power bank, and a Bluetooth speaker. On the same floor, I visited the True Move shop and bought an unlimited package for my smartphone for 300 baht a month, which was for 20 megabytes down and 20 megabytes up, an absolute bargain. I also paid a visit to the Tucum Center to purchase a carry device for my phone for when I was walking around. Over the next few days, I set up my smartphone for live streaming, linked my YouTube account to the phone, installed all the live streaming software, and was ready to go. My legs from the first several days had not been an issue and hadn't caused me any problems at all. The bandages for them, like I thought, were very cheap. I did not want to start streaming until I had my full-time accommodation and had moved out of the hotel, which was for just a 10-day stay. It seemed strange, but I knew I would be better off living just outside the main party area of Pattaya. I already knew that when I moved out of my hotel for a long stay, I hadn't contacted the place because they always had rooms available. Just off Pattaya Central Road, there's a supermarket called Big C Extra, which is great for food shopping. Most dishes there cost between 50 to 60 Thai baht, less than $2. At the side of Big C Extra, there's a road called Paniachang that runs for about a mile along this road, about 1,000 meters in. There are buildings called Siri and Siri Place. I had stayed there before, and it was full of Thai people. The room cost 4,500 baht a month, plus about another 1,500 baht for electricity and water. The room was immaculately clean with a small bathroom that included a shower. Right opposite the building, there was a collection of 3 small Thai restaurants, and just across the road was a large 7-Eleven. Outside the 7-Eleven, there was a little outdoor noodle restaurant where the noodles with pork or chicken in broth were excellent. They only served those 2 dishes for 50 baht each, and I never got tired of them. The 7-Eleven was super handy. It even sold bandages for my legs, which made it even more convenient. It also sold small packets of breakfast cereal and a small plastic bottle of milk, which I would have every day for breakfast. Before I did a live stream, I needed to test my phone, my internet connection, and the stability of everything together. I had set up Prism Live Studio and linked it to my Streamlabs account and my PayPal account for potential donations. I started outside Siri Place, walked to the 7-Eleven, had a walk around, then left to have some noodles, and started the 1,000-meter walk to Big C Extra. The initial walk was up a hill, then down a slope, taking about 25 minutes while streaming. Big C Extra spans over 2 floors. The first floor was dedicated to food with a huge Thai restaurant and various food shops like KFC and Subway. I walked around while streaming and then went upstairs where there was a massive supermarket and DIY store. Inside the supermarket was a large electronics section where you could buy phones and TVs much cheaper than in the UK. After testing my stream at Big C Extra, I walked back along Paniachang to Siri Place. The entire outing took about 2 hours, and I was pleased that my connection didn't drop out once, giving me a good outlook for future streams. I decided to do my first stream on Swa 7, a place I'd visited for many years and always enjoyed for its friendly bars and crowded streets filled with Thai people. It was 3 p.m., quite hot. I started in the middle of Swa 7, set up my phone, and began streaming as I walked down to Beach Road. From there, I took a left onto Beach Road towards Central Festival Mall, did a lap around the mall, and then walked back along the beach side for about a mile before doubling back onto Second Road. I found a place to sit, had a late lunch, and chatted with a few viewers on my stream. At this point, after streaming for about 2 hours, I only had about 15 viewers, which was surprising given I had over 33,000 subscribers. Only 2 people were active in the chat. I attributed this to people not knowing I was streaming since it was all new. After 4 hours, I decided to end the stream. No donations came through, but that didn't bother me as there would be plenty of time and streams in the future. After reviewing my stream, I realized the footage was very shaky, so I took a bus to a large mall to buy a DJI-3 handheld smartphone stabilizer. For my second stream, which also lasted 4 hours, I walked along Suan Bua Khao, stopping at bars to rest, speak to my chat, and escape the heat, which could be unbearable at times in Thailand. I still only got the same number of viewers and no donations through Streamlabs. Since the channel was UN monetized, I didn't expect miracles, but this could become a concern, especially without Google AdSense revenue in the long term. However, giving up was not an option for me. I had given up too much in the UK to be here and was now down to my last £1,500, which would last me 2 months. I also did night streams that generally attracted more viewers, including at the famous sexy bar just off Suan Bua Khao. The people there were all fantastic and very welcoming, as were most foreigners. Rarely did anyone turn their nose up at what I was doing. However, at times, certain areas could be very hostile towards vloggers and live streamers in Pattaya. Over the next several weeks, I streamed every day and every night in Pattaya, but for some reason, my streams were not getting viewers. At this point, it occurred to me that my channel had been down for 3 years and was not monetized. Then it hit me, my channel might be blacklisted, and the reason I wasn't getting viewers was because it wasn't being promoted by YouTube in any way. Other streamers, with between 2,000 and 5,000 subscribers, could easily get over 100 viewers, but I was getting nothing like that. I was also not gaining any new subscribers, and my overall hourly watch time, needed to be 4,000 hours per year on YouTube to get monetized, was going up painfully slow. None of this had crossed my mind while I was in the UK. Maybe I was so blind to all this because once I got my channel back, all I could think about was how quickly I could return to Thailand. I had made a real mistake at this point. After several weeks, my money had dwindled so much that I didn't have enough for the next month's rent or for my future visa run, which is required after a 6-day stay in Thailand. I had my next month's rent bill, which I usually paid at Big C into the Thai Farmers Bank, but I only had £80 to my name. With electricity and water, the bill came to 6,000 baht, which I simply did not have. I packed everything into my backpack, leaving lots of clothes behind, and just left. I felt ashamed for skipping the rent, but at that point, I had nothing. On the day of leaving, the date was November 8, 2022. I had arrived in Thailand on August 29th, so in total, I had been there for 71 days. If you work it out, I had £2,500, and having spent that amount of time in Thailand, I was spending £35 each day. I also did my 30-day visa extension after the first 30 days, which meant I had a total of 60 days in the kingdom. At that time, with a standard visa on arrival, I was now overstayed by 11 days and illegal in the Kingdom of Thailand. I walked around the first day, just me and my backpack. I spent time in Central Festival Mall and on Beach Road. At this point, I had less than £10 to my name and realized I was in real trouble because I needed water and food. The first 24 hours went by very quickly. I ended up sleeping on some patio furniture belonging to a hotel on Swa Dian. The next day, I spent in Central Festival Mall trying to devise a plan. At night time, while walking along Beach Road, I hadn't eaten for 24 hours, and I spotted somebody I had covered in several of my early videos from years ago. Her name is B. She's a girl who walks along Beach Road all day, looking for customers to apply her trade with. I thought she might offer me a place to stay or help me a little since she had always been very friendly, always stopping to chat with me, and we had tried to be friends. I told her my circumstances and that I hadn't eaten. She took me to the food market in front of Central Festival Mall's beachside and bought me a prawn curry with rice. The meal was absolute heaven, and she also bought a few bottles of water. I asked B for advice on finding a place to stay, and she said, You can sleep in the police station on the chairs in reception, they don't mind. After spending a couple of hours with her, she told me she had to get back to work and gave me 200 baht, wishing me well. That night, around midnight, I made my way to Pattaya police station. There were 4 rows of chairs, each row about 10 chairs, and there were already a few people asleep on them. So, I used my backpack as a pillow and a towel to block out the reception lights. Surprisingly, I slept very well, getting up the next morning at 8 a.m. I spent the next day in the mall again, using the disabled toilets to lock and wash myself, which was handy because they also had toiletries like soap and hot water. This routine continued for 4 nights with me doing the same schedule as before, daytime in the mall, nighttime in the police station. On the 4th morning, I noticed the police station receptionist paying attention to me as I sat up from my sleep. The receptionist called me over and asked if I was okay. I told her I was waiting for some money from the UK to come through, knowing this was not true, and felt bad for lying to a woman who showed concern for me. After sitting back down for 15 minutes, I got up, approached her again, and admitted, "I have no money coming, and I am obviously homeless now." She said, "Okay, I understand," and asked if I was hungry. I said yes, starving, as I hadn't eaten for 18 hours at this point. She gave me 100 baht, which is about $3, and directed me to an alley leading to Suan 8 where I could get some food and coffee. Chapter 5. Pattaya Jail. I thanked her for the money, went outside through the alley, found a man making fresh coffee for 30 baht, and then saw a food vendor who made me a 3-egg omelette with rice, which really filled me up. After about 30 minutes, I returned to the police reception and thanked her for her kindness. She asked, "What are you going to do now?" To which I replied, "I have no idea, I am really stuck now." She then asked if I had my passport, which I confirmed and offered to give to her. After viewing my passport for a few minutes, she suggested I hand myself in to the immigration police in the building, which I agreed to without much thought. She instructed me to sit back down and not leave the building, which I agreed to. After what seemed like a few hours, 2 officers approached me, telling me to follow them. I was taken upstairs to the 1st floor and marched into a small room, no bigger than 10 feet by 10 feet. The room had no computers, just a height board to measure against. I was told to sit down, and they scrutinized my passport, trying to find my latest visa extension or visa run inside the document. One officer told me to stand up and hold my passport in front of the height board. They used their smartphones to take photos. There was no dedicated camera as I had expected. They took a front photo, then side photos, and then told me to sit back down. They then gave me a large Thai meal that was lukewarm but tasted great and provided 3 bottles of water. They left for about 30 minutes and came back to escort me to the jail, which was 1 floor up. This whole process seemed to take about 2 hours, and by now, it was around 5 p.m. I also noticed that since I was dealing with the police, I hadn't been arrested or anything like that, which I couldn't understand. I thought, isn't it a crime to overstay in Thailand? Why haven't they arrested me? Even though it was 5 p.m. and light outside, as I walked into Pattaya jail, it was dark and dungeon-like. The jail was 40 feet in length by 20 feet wide and had a walkway going from end to end with a cell in each corner, making 4 cells in total. I was greeted by a man called Korea. He was my height, at 5 foot 10 inches, well-built, square-jawed, and strong-looking. I think he might have played rugby in the past. He shook my hand and pointed to the left back wall cell for me to go into, which I did. There were already a couple of Indian men in there who greeted me with smiles. There was nothing to sleep on other than a solid concrete floor, and at one end of the cell, there was a wall that separated it from the other corner cell. That cell had only women in it and always stayed padlocked, with Korea always keeping the key with him. Up against the wall in the cell that Korea put me in was a toilet and wash area, which, to be blunt, was just pure filth. The toilet, a squat toilet on the floor, was dark brown with feces covering the entire thing. It was absolutely disgusting. There was a bucket of water to the side of the toilet in the same cubicle area for washing, which filled me with dread because I needed to keep my legs clean, and this was utter squalor. As I sat there, I thought, How long am I going to be here? So, I went and asked Korea, and he said he was not sure exactly, but usually, it takes a few days. The horror of knowing I had to stay one night here was bad, but 2 or more was scary to me. I sat on the floor. It was hot and humid inside the jail, and all the light was artificial from the ceiling. At 10 p.m., we were all told to get together for a jail photo. We were all made to squat down with our backs turned to the Thai police while they counted us and then took our pictures as a collective. The women did the same thing in their cell and had their picture taken too. This was done by Korea. The Thai police never once stepped a single foot inside the jail. It was always done by Korea and a few sidekicks, one of them being a guy called Mohammed, who, along with his friend, had an entire cell to themselves with blankets, large packs of water, cakes, and any food they wanted. Mohammed pretended he could not speak English, but when he spoke to Korea, he spoke more than enough to understand any English speaker. After the photos were done, I went back to my cell and got my head down. I took off my t-shirt and used it as a pillow to the best I could. At about 3 a.m., I was woken when the cell door, which could slide across, was opened. Bearing in mind the women's cell was always locked, the men's were always open, and I was free to move about. There was a young Middle Eastern man talking to the wall which divided my cell from where the women were staying, and he was chanting. At this point, Korea walked into our cell, gave the young man a hard slap around the face, and his body language was very aggressive towards him. Korea took a step back, and when the young man started talking to the wall again, Korea gave him 2 or 3 more hard slaps around the head. The size difference between the 2 men was massive, and the hits must have really hurt, but it had the desired effect, and the young man stopped and went to sleep in the walkway. I realized quickly the next morning because the Thai police gave me water and food. There was none of that at all in the jail. If you did not beg, you went without. This must be a human rights violation, I was thinking. By noon that day, I went to speak to 2 women called Olga and Gala, both claiming they were Russian, but the consensus in the cell was that they were Ukrainian. The 2 had never handed over their passports. I think they did not want to be sent back to Ukraine, which was a war zone. I also noticed both women had smartphones. I had had my smartphone taken away from me and was told I would not be able to have it again until I left Thailand. I said to Gala, "How come you have phones?" They were both on the internet, and Gala just rubbed her fingers together to indicate money. I asked, "If you don't mind, how much does that cost?" She said 1,200 baht for 24 hours, which is about $35, and I asked if they paid that every day, and they both said yes. It turned out both women had well-off Thai boyfriends. Each day, they would come to the jail, spoil them, buy them any food, and pay for the phone each day to keep. Also, they said if you have the money, the Thai police will get someone outside the jail to get you any food you like for a fee to the Thai police. I never saw the Thai police deal with money directly. That was all done through Korea. The Thai police are not stupid. They would not be seen dirtying their hands with anything illegal. The police had informed me that they had contacted the UK embassy in Bangkok on my behalf, and they were aware I was in Pattaya jail because I had handed myself in. On the second night, it was truly eventful to say the least. We had about 10 people arrive in total, 4 Asian females who were herded into the female cell, and several Indian men who just sat down and were very quiet. But the 2 that stood out were an older Australian man and another Asian man. They were handcuffed together and put in a small side cell on their own, lying on their backs the whole night. The Australian gentleman non-stop shouted, "Uncuff me, you bastards." He literally said this for about 8 hours straight, every 30 seconds. He couldn't care less, and Korea was powerless to stop him. Also, that night England were playing in the World Cup. There was a side window at the entrance to the jail right into the police officer's duty office. The guy who and I was slapped about stood there and watched the game through the very uncleaned window that separated us from the police. In the little side cell, there was no toilet, and the floor was sodden with urine. It absolutely stunk. They were handcuffed, lying on their backs in a position where they could not move. Korea said, "I've seen this load of times," and when I asked how long he had been in there, he said, 5 months. He was overstaying in Thailand by over 5 years, so the Thai authorities go out of their way to process you very slowly if you've stayed that long. Here I was, having overstayed for 11 days, thinking I was hard done by. The thought of staying in that dungeon for 5 months was horrendous to say the least. Pretty sure there are human rights violations by Thai immigration. This, of course, is nothing compared to what I've seen in the IDC in Bangkok. The next morning, when the Australian man was let go because he had sobered up, he was a pleasant guy, but he had soiled himself and just stank. Another inmate gave him underpants and shorts, and he used the filthy toilet and cleaning facilities to wash himself because we were all going to court that day. When we were all told to stand up and stand side by side, 5 in a row and 2 across, making 10 people in total, the Thai immigration police handcuffed the whole line together, first the line of 5, then the person next to me. We slowly walked down the stairs to the ground floor. The whole line consisted of 5 women and 5 men. We were told to get onto a pickup truck that had a cage on the back with a covering on the roof. It took us a couple of minutes to get us on the truck, where we were 5 each row, facing the person I was cuffed to. Chapter 6. Pattaya Detention Center. The driver took off from Pattaya Police Station and down a slope which turned left onto Beach Road. But the problem was the driver thought he was in a race car. As we hit the bottom of the slope and turned left, it was done at such speed that all 10 people inside the caged van ended up in a huge pile in the middle of the floor. The maneuver was so violent that 3 passengers' handcuffs came off, and it didn't stop there. He was bobbing and weaving through all the traffic. All the women were howling with laughter at his driving. We didn't stop at a single red light. It was just non-stop race car mode. A journey to Pattaya Court would have taken 15 minutes in a taxi, but this took about 5 tops. There wasn't a passenger on board who wasn't shocked and speechless. This was clearly the Thai way of showing us they're the boss and can do what they like, when they like. Once we got to the courthouse, the police took the cuffs off us and separated the men and women instantly. All the men were put behind bars in a huge room, not really a cell, just a holding area. We were all given a bottle of water each, at which point I realized we were going to be here for some time. I was correct. It was the most boring 3 hours of my life. I told the police officer on duty I needed medical attention for my legs, which were a mess. The bandages I had on were usually changed every morning when I got out of bed. These had been on for about 60 hours now. They were dirty with a yellow substance that had soaked through the bandages, which I showed to the officer. He sat at his desk for 10 minutes, then took his sandwich box and just went home without reporting it to anyone. He understood English because I had spoken to him a couple of times, so that couldn't be an excuse. After 3 hours, all the men were told to get up and follow an officer. We were told to take off our shoes and socks before we moved. We met up with the females, and we all were walked into a small room and told to sit there and be quiet. This was the courtroom, which was very small indeed, with a big screen TV and a webcam on top of it. The Thai police asked if anyone had money or a bank card to get some money out from an ATM to pay fines. I hadn't a penny to my name. I thought this was going to be interesting to see how they'd deal with me being penniless. Once everyone had taken their turn to get cash, we just sat there for about 45 minutes and waited. The screen in the court came on, and sure enough, there was a female judge sitting there. She started calling individual people's names, and one by one, they stood in front of the TV until instructed to sit by the judge. I was next up. I had my translator, which was for me and another inmate to speak to the judge. The judge said in Thai that I had overstayed my visa, which was translated to me by my interpreter. I said yes. She asked if I had money to pay a fine of 3,500 baht. I said no, and she looked shocked at that. She even asked, "Are you sure?" which I confirmed through the translator. At this point, I was told that because of non-payment of court costs, I must serve 6 days in the detention center. This was a jail on the edge of Pattaya itself. I just nodded my head like a complete fool, as if I could do anything about that, and they marched me out to where I came from. I was on my own and did not see another inmate again, male or female. 2 hours passed. It was about 5 p.m., and an officer said, "Put your flip-flops on," which I did. "Come with me." This time, they just put handcuffs on me and told me to get in the back of a van. The van was much cleaner and safer looking, and it was cool compared to the chicken coop we had arrived at court in. I was sitting with about 6 other men. They were all handcuffed as well. The journey started to Pattaya Detention Center on the edge of Pattaya City. The journey took about 25 minutes, and we got there around 5:30 p.m. We were all told to get off the bus once through the gate into a large outside area under a few canopies. We were told to strip and do numerous stretching exercises to see if we had anything concealed or inserted into our bodies, mainly weapons and drugs up our backsides. Once done, they shaved every single one of our heads. After that, the jail staff told us to take a bucket, dip it into a barrel of water, and pour it over our heads. They supplied shampoo and told us to clean our entire bodies from head to toe, which we all did, all while we were completely naked in front of about 15 detention center staff. They then supplied a bottle of water each and a small meal in a metal tray with a tightly fitted, see-through plastic cover. We all sat together on the side of the entrance road, eating our food. The Thai people at this point were in discussion with each other about my legs and the open sores on them. Everyone's face looked concerned, and a member of their staff said, "You see Nurse Soon," to which I just nodded and said, "Thank you." It started to get dark, and the other inmates were led away. I sat in front of a small medical office not far from the entrance to the detention center. At this point, about 10 Thai prisoners were saying, "What's wrong with your legs?" They asked, "Diabetes?" I said, "No, I have lymphedema, and my legs take a long time to heal without compression." The female nurse twigged to what I was getting at and informed the rest. I was told to get up, and a single guard and the nurse took me to her office. She put iodine on my wounds and bandaged them to a pretty good level. I was told to follow a guard, and I was walked to an area through a big gate, which made things seem that much more final. I was in a real Thai prison for non-payment of about a $100 court fine. I had my towels, which I had had since my trip to Thailand began. One of the processing staff, who was trans, took a shine to one of my towels. It had a sunset theme on it, and said, "Could I keep it?" I said, "Yes." She smiled and said, "I like you." At this point, I was told to get up and march to a dorm-looking building with barred windows but no glass. I was told to take off my flip-flops and walk with them. They escorted me up 2 floors and to a cell. The cell had about 40 people in it and was about the same size as Pattaya Jail, but because there were no walls or bars inside the room, it made it all look bigger. At the back of the room, there was a row of people, and above them was a wooden structure with another row of people. It looked like a row of very long bunk beds. I was on the opposite side of the room on the floor. I was given 2 blankets, one to lie on and one for a pillow. The room was very clean and tidy. I also noticed the toilet area was immaculately cleaned, and the system for drinking water was much better equipped than Pattaya Jail, which brought home to me that Pattaya Jail was really like a dungeon, as I had thought in the first place. There was a head of the room, like in Pattaya Jail. This was down to a Thai guy, head to toe covered in tattoos. Even though he looked very intimidating, his demeanor was very friendly. He asked me, "Are you okay?" as I was putting my blanket on the floor. I said, "Yes, just a bit shocked with what has been going on in the last few days." He said, "In here, temporary stay, so you do not leave the cell until released. The rest of the people can go outside in the daytime." He also handed me a rules book and a schedule book, which for me was pointless. I was only there for 2 nights. I had spent 2 nights in Pattaya and would be staying here for 2 nights, with 2 nights off for good behavior. The guy who sat next to me on the bus over to Pattaya Detention Center now had a pair of leg chains on. I said to the room leader, "What's he done?" He just looked straight at me and said, "He is a killer, so they all get leg chains." It turned out he had been banging his daughter-in-law, and his wife found out and screamed bloody murder, and he did them both in. The trans person in the cell flirted with everyone, including me, and showered right next to where I slept. I went out of my way not to pay attention. I did not want to give the wrong impression. HIV in these places is at truly unbelievable levels. Over the cell entrance door, There was a TV that had some Thai soap playing for the entertainment of everyone in the cell. At 11 p.m., the TV went off, and everyone was instructed to sleep. The lights remained on all night and were blinding. I had to use a part of my blanket that was being used as a pillow to cover my eyes. It was my first night, and I was 10 times more comfortable than on the Pattaya police station concrete floor. I was warm, not roasting, and comfy. Because of the lack of sleep for the first 2 nights in Pattaya, I slept like a baby. At 7 a.m., we were all woken by the head of the room, who was instructed by the detention center guards. We all sat up and made our beds by folding and rolling the 2 blankets up. During the night, it had been uneventful, apart from the guy next to me who had gotten up a few times and sat next to people who were fast asleep. The head of the cell put him straight, but he still did it a further 2 times that night. Breakfast arrived early, at about 7:30 a.m., which was delivered on the same trays as when we got here and was outside. The food was rice, vegetables, and some meat, which I could not identify. Once breakfast was done, the whole cell had to clean the room until it was spotless. This included using chemicals on the floor with a good wipe down. The TV was back on, and the Thais between them were having loads of banter, which I could not understand a word of, but the overall atmosphere in the cell was pretty good. At noon, we had lunch, which was the same as breakfast, which was good. There was always enough for me, and I don't think I ever finished all my food once. At 3 p.m., a nurse arrived, and I sat just outside of the cell door. She changed all my dressings again. This time, it seemed a little half-assed. Nothing really fit well and tight like when I got here. I did not complain. I was not paying for any of this, so I kept my mouth shut and just went back into the cell and sat on my blankets. We had our evening meal at 7 p.m., which was almost the same again. The soup it was all delivered in was slightly spicy. Not going to lie, it had a nice kick to it and was the best I had eaten since being here. That night at 11 p.m., again, the TV was off, and everyone got their heads down. It must have been the early hours of the morning when I felt a strange sensation around my mouth. I opened my eyes, and the guy next to me, who had bothered people the night before, was dropping little rolled-up balls of paper into my mouth. I said out loud, "What the hell are you doing?" The guy was unresponsive. He did not speak a word of English. The cell leader looked at me as I took the paper out of my mouth, jumped up, and slapped the guy hard around the face. He then told him to sleep. I assume it was that he just pointed to his rolled-out blankets. Over the next few hours, the guy next to me got up at least 5 more times, started to talk to himself non-stop, and hassled all the people asleep. Clearly, he had very strong mental issues, and to each new occurring event, the cell leader would just wail on him more and more. At one point, about 4 a.m., the guy got slapped senseless by the cell leader. At this point, he finally lay down and never bothered a single person again. The next day, everything repeated with breakfast and cleaning. The only difference was that the cell leader said I would go in a few hours, and sure enough, after lunch, I was told to get up and escorted out of the cell, then out of the block. I put on my flip-flops outside and made my way to the big metal gate, which was still in the compound and not the final exit gate. The Thai guards filled out some forms and said, "You go with him." Chapter 7. Pattaya Jail Again. A Thai police officer took me in his 4x4, which I thought would be going to Bangkok and the IDC, but it was not. Instead, he took me to Bang Lamang police station, which was well out of the way of the main Pattaya police station. He walked me into a locked-down area in the back of the police station and into a cell. This cell was even more grimy than Pattaya police station. The floor and walls looked like they had never been cleaned. There were 2 other people in my cell, and it was so dark and dungeon-like it was comical. The young lad who was there for immigration reasons like me handed me a couple of bottles of water. I went into full panic mode, hollering to get the attention of the guard on duty. When I did, I said, "You've made a mistake, I should be at the IDC now." He just frowned and said, "I will make a call." After a couple of hours, he brought us some food. The food was wrapped in a bamboo leaf and consisted of rice and chicken curry all mixed. We had one each, and it was fantastic, very tasty indeed. By this time, it was getting late, maybe 9 p.m., and the guard paid me a visit. He said, "You go soon," to me. Not long after, I was walked outside, and another inmate from another cell was with me. We were both put on the back of a Toyota pickup truck, both of our backs facing the driver's cabin. We were both out in the open. My left hand was handcuffed to the side of the truck, my right hand was handcuffed to the other inmate's left hand, and his right hand was cuffed to the other side of the truck. I'm not going to lie, I'm a little claustrophobic, and not being able to move was hell on earth, horrendous. The drive back to Pattaya police station was a truly unpleasant experience. I simply hated every second of it. We were both led straight back into the jail at Pattaya police station, no messing about. I was greeted by Korea, who was surprised to see me and asked if I was okay. I said, "No, the trip over was horrendous on the back," and he replied, "Yeah, I know, a lot of people don't like that." As I got back into my cell at Pattaya police station, there were several people in there, but the person who stood out was an Australian named Simon, someone I would end up getting lots of help from eventually. He asked, "Why are you here?" I replied, 11 days overstay. I asked him, "What about you?" He said, 3 days overstay. I looked visibly shocked. He explained his landlady had grassed him up over a disagreement. I said, 3 days, that seems severe, which he agreed with. He also said she had all his belongings, which were worth a fortune. Simon was from Perth in Western Australia and told me he set up computer servers for clients, making over 250,000 Australian dollars in 1 year. Simon also had a phone, which he said, "Tomorrow you can use to call the embassy," which I thanked him for. He had his Thai girlfriend bring him food and drinks, which he shared a lot. He really was a very good and decent man. Korea was getting his finger in the face of the young Muslim guy all the while since I got back, ordering people around left, right, and center. I told Simon he had smacked the guy around the head loads of times for virtually nothing. Simon said to me, "He won't be doing that to me, I guarantee he won't." In the daytime, Simon allowed me to use his phone where I called the British Embassy. They knew about me because the receptionist at Pattaya police station, who had helped me by buying me food, had called and let them know. The woman on the phone at the British Embassy in Bangkok said there was very little she could do until I was in the IDC in Bangkok, where they could come and visit me and talk in person. At 11 p.m., the police brought in loads of new people. The jail was heaving at this point, and everywhere was wet through with people traipsing the water about in the cell. They brought in 2 Russian men. One had a friendly demeanor but was sarcastic to Korea, so he was made to go into the tiny side cell, and the other Russian was with the rest of us. The Russian with us was clearly smashed out of his head on drugs, which lasted for the 2 days I was there in Pattaya police station. This Russian had a nasty habit. If you spoke to him, he would just spit in your face, doing it to both me and Simon and several others. At this point, Korea stepped in, put him in the side cell, and took the other Russian out with the rest of us. It took 5 of us to get the other Russian into the side cell because he did not want to budge. I, Simon, Korea, Mohammed, and his mate were all grappling with the Russian to get him into the cell. It took a few minutes, but we managed it eventually. I got up the next morning on my first day there, and lots of the Indians had just disappeared in the night. I asked Simon, and he did not know. During the day, Mohammed had a lady visit him, wearing a burqa, who gave him 2 large containers of food. After she left, Mohammed went into his cell, which had some blankets on the bars blocking the view and giving him some privacy, but there was just a little part one could see through. He had one of the food containers, which was big, full of rice. He was digging into the rice with his hand, and I saw him pull out a wrapped power bank and a few other small things I could not identify. I told Simon, and he said, "I am not surprised." I asked him what he meant, and he explained that to keep his phone, he must pay 1,200 baht a day, but for every 10% of battery he wants to charge up, he must pay a further 200 baht. I was simply speechless. What a complete and utter scam. After Simon's new visit from his girlfriend that daytime, he gave me 1,500 baht for when I get to the IDC, which I thanked him for. Every time I saw Simon talking to Korea, they simply did not get on at all. Simon despised it every time I saw him put his hands on other inmates, smacking them round the heads. This happened all too often. That night, I got my head down and woke up after a few hours, sitting up, not aware of any occurrence at all. But I noticed Simon was missing, so I said to Korea, "Where is Simon?" He had been put in the side cell. It took Korea and a few others to help him do that, but Simon was in the side cell on his own. He was in a very emotional state at this point. He told me the names of his daughters, saying, "If I don't get out of this, please contact them and tell them I love them." I spoke to Korea, but he did not care at all. Simon stayed in the cell until the next morning. The next day, Simon was let out, and him and several other people all went to Pattaya courthouse in the morning. Simon and just a few others were back after a few hours. He had enough to pay the court costs. Chapter 8. Bang Khen IDC. Several others and I were now just waiting for the ride from Pattaya police station to Bangkok IDC. At 6 p.m., we were all led out, but this time, none of us were handcuffed at all. We were all heading for the Bang Khen IDC. We all got into a van that had wooden seats running down the back of a pickup, and we had to sit opposite each other. The trip took about 2 hours, and it was friendly banter all the way. Simon gave the rest of his money to all the other people on the transport to the IDC. By the time we arrived at Bang Khen IDC, it was night time, and as we pulled into the facility, the Thai detention center staff were waiting for us. We got out of the van and went into the building. As we walked upstairs to be processed, we walked past cells full of women, and it was mind-blowing. They were in there like sardines, not an inch of gap between where they were sleeping on the floor. Pattaya Detention Center had a huge amount of room in comparison. We arrived in the upstairs office where we were all told to sit on the floor. The office was nice and cool, with about half a dozen Thai immigration staff at their computers. One by one, they started calling us over, asking questions to confirm who we were. They took pictures of my passport and photos of me with my passport held up. After that, I sat back down on the floor until everyone else was processed. After everyone was done, we all went back downstairs and got back in the van. We were not staying in this building. We did a few minutes ride around the corner, and when we got out at our destination, we were greeted by about 10 or more inmates of Bang Khen IDC who were going to process us. They took my phone off me and went through every single item I had in my green bag. I had taken a few things but left the rest. They left me with 4 pairs of boxer shorts, 2 pairs of light-colored summer trousers, my flip-flops, my pair of Slazenger trainers, and a few bandages and other things. They started doing body checks on every one of us, which was very thorough, checking in our mouths, patting us down, checking between our legs, and every other place over our bodies. People with longer hair even had their hair checked to see if there were any items concealed. After this was done, we were led inside and told to queue where the cell gate behind us was locked and padlocked. Once done, they opened another wide cell door that was just the same but on the inside. We were all escorted into Bang Khen IDC and told to sit in a line as they went through all our details. They knew about my leg, which they did not ask to see. We were staying in a converted basketball court which was big. It looked like at least 250 people were in there. On the side of the basketball court, there was double-layered barbed wire with razors all along it, and on one end were the inmates acting like staff who ran the place. Also along that wall was a tuck shop selling bars of chocolate, cigarettes, and bottles of pop. On the other side of the room, there were 2 toilet areas, both with showers, and an area where you could dry out your clothes after hand-washing them. The place was run by about 10 inmates, all from Myanmar, and with a click of their fingers, they could get another 20 if they needed. One of them told me, "In a few days, you see the doctor because of your legs." I was really surprised if not pleased at first with this place. It had a smooth concrete floor around the basketball court, and I walked what must have been miles around it in the first few days. They also had a large screen TV in there, playing all the games from the World Cup. That was heaven. That was the pleasantry. The food in there was horrific. I had the money Simon gave me, which allowed me to purchase a few large grey blankets for 200 baht each, one for lying on and one for a pillow. At this point, Simon had made friends with half the people in there and was introducing me to all sorts of people. One night, someone in there had a massive seizure, and Simon was truly unhappy with how the guy was treated. He said they stood on his chest and put a spoon down his throat. He made it very clear to the Myanmar staff, who ran the place for the Thais, that he was fuming with them. One night, Simon said to me, "I have told them that I've lost my antipsychotic medicines and can start acting very strange if I do not get it." At this point, the gang running the place said, "Come with us," and with 7 or 8 people surrounding Simon, they marched him out of the basketball court, and I never saw him again. The guy who had the seizure died from it, and that's what tipped Simon over. He just could not believe how they could treat such vulnerable people. It was an immigration detention center, not a prison. I also struggled with the food there, which was served 3 times a day. Cold rice with a round, hockey puck piece of meat, which they said was chicken, but I was not sure. It was horrible, bland, and just inedible, even though I was hungry. It was a chore to eat even a few mouthfuls of it. What I was liking was the show, and like the guy said when I first got in, I saw a doctor first over a phone, then face to face just outside. She would dress my wounds and come there every few days to do that, always doing a top-notch job. I had only seen a few people get smacked round the head for not being ready and upright when food was being served, but it was never that bad. After about 5 days in there, I noticed I had completely lost my appetite, and with the money I had left, I did not even want to buy any snacks, including chocolate. I also noticed my left foot was swelling up, and my energy levels were virtually nothing. Every time I stood up was very difficult, I was getting very weak, and walking now on my foot was very painful indeed. The female doctor arrived, examined my foot, looked worried, and said, "I think you need to go to the hospital." She asked me multiple times if I had insurance, which I always answered, "No, I have nothing." One of the other inmates was a German called Fernando. He was caught on a visa overstay in Phuket. He was literally living on the beach when the police got him and locked him up. He genuinely cared for my welfare, was a gentle giant, and force-fed me mouthfuls of chocolate and bought me little bottles of Fanta orange. When I needed to be lifted to my feet, he was always there to help me. By this point, my foot was so painful I couldn't put into words how much I couldn't walk on it, even for a few seconds. To get about, I had a wheelchair and a Zimmer frame, but due to my lack of energy and strength, the Zimmer frame was a big no. I saw the doctor again, and she did nothing for my massively swollen foot. She said she was working on arranging a hospital stay, but, because I had no money, she had to apply for me through a charity for the hospital stay. At this point, I hadn't eaten for 10 days straight, just giving my food to other inmates at Khen. Any tasks now were virtually impossible. I had to be carried to the toilet, and showering was virtually impossible, standing there for hours at a time. After about 10 days of pain with my foot, an ambulance arrived with police staff driving it. This was at 2 p.m., and I got all my stuff together and was wheeled out of Khen IDC and into the ambulance. We didn't go straight to the hospital. They first took me to the main IDC in Suan, Phlu. When I got there, I took my blanket to an open waiting area and put them on the floor while waiting to go to the hospital. We waited for a few more people, which took a couple of hours. The nurse gave me a bottle of Coke and a packet of biscuits. At 7 p.m., 3 of us and a driver made our way into the van and out of the Suan Phlu IDC, heading across Bangkok to the Bangkok Police Hospital. Chapter 9. Hospital Stay. On arriving, the officer driving parked us on a comically steep slope. I got out with the other inmates and had to walk into the hospital myself. It was pure agony. The nurse saw I was struggling and got me a wheelchair, wheeling me inside the hospital. They took me straight to a higher floor and put me on a comfy hospital bed. A young nurse put a cannula in my arm, and they started giving me antibiotics straight away. I had been there an hour before a couple of nurses pushed my bed to another area where they x-rayed my foot. They took 3 in total from different angles. After a few hours in a larger ward that seemed to be a holding place because it was super busy, the porter wheeled my bed to a higher floor and to a private room which had 4 bed spaces, but I was alone. In the room, it had the ability to be locked from the outside, so I couldn't escape or try to leave in any way. There was a bedpan and bottles for me to urinate in if I needed the toilet, and on a cabinet for my items next to my bed, there was a big box of biscuits for me with 12 packs and lots of other treats to eat. The first night, I didn't have a single visit from a doctor, so I got my head down nice and early. Just before I went to sleep, the police staff who worked there started clanging some chains in front of me, saying, "You do not try to run." I just laughed and said, "No, I am too weak, and I am so ill." They agreed and put the chains back. That night on a comfy hospital bed was the best night's sleep I'd had in Thailand. It was just bliss. The next day, I had 3 doctors and at least 3 nurses around my bed looking at my foot. They asked if it was painful, to which I replied, "Yes, when I walk on it, but lying here now, it's just uncomfortable." The doctors asked me about my situation and how I ended up here, to which I replied with the truth. They were interested in how I got there without paying anything, clearly something the hospital staff was not used to. My breakfast arrived, which was a million miles away from what I had been getting at Bang Khen IDC. It consisted of a Thai dish with meat, eggs, fruit, yogurt, and a few other things. Everything I was given was very nice, and I was very pleased. This was the first real food I had eaten in over 10 days. At this point, I was just thinking I hoped to go from here to the airport and then straight home. Over the next few days, the routine was the same. I was fed 3 times a day, which was always good, followed by a mid-morning visit from the same group of doctors doing their rounds. One morning stood out as they brought in some bandages and said they would wrap my foot. I thought this didn't sound good. The bandages were thick, orange, and very stretchy. They started winding it around my foot. After they finished and left me alone, the bandages were just unpleasant and painful. Within 30 minutes, they were completely unbearable on my foot, so I took the bandages off and told a regular nurse they really were hurting my foot and not helping at all. I don't know if the doctors thought they could squeeze the swelling out of my foot, but it didn't work at all, and for the first day in the hospital, it made me feel miserable. The next day, the doctors did their rounds and paid me a visit. One doctor suggested she operate on my foot, which perked me up and would in any case be progress. I said, "Yes, but what do you suggest?" She said, "Cut open your foot and drain all the fluid from it because of the huge amount of swelling." I asked if I would be put under or given local anesthetic. She smiled and said, "You will not be given anything. During the procedure, if it hurts, we will administer some morphine if the pain gets really bad." I instantly said, "No thanks, I will wait till I get back to the UK for any procedures," and she said, "Okay, just a suggestion." No way is that a way to do surgery. It seemed like something from older days, a long time ago. She said if I changed my mind to let her know. I tried asking several times how long my stay was going to be and why I had heard nothing from the British Embassy in Bangkok, but I got nothing from them, and with no access to my own phone, which I had but they wouldn't let me use unless I paid 1,200 baht a day. My total stay in the hospital was 7 nights, and it was a real respite from what I had experienced. At 7 p.m., just after dark, 2 Thai police walked in and said, "You're leaving, get dressed." At the time, I was wearing just the bog-standard hospital clothing supplied. Both officers were pushy and said this was very urgent, get dressed straight away. They led me down to the minivan ambulance to take me to the IDC in Suan, Phlu, which was the main IDC as well. I noticed when I got in the ambulance that my bag and all my belongings were there, with my towels and blankets. Chapter 10. Suan Phlu IDC. On the way to Suan Phlu, I also noticed that the hospital in their rush had not taken out the cannula still in my arm. I mentioned it to the driver, but he didn't care one bit. We got to Suan Phlu, and there was a big metal door which I went through and sat in a wheelchair. My foot had not even slightly healed. The 7 days of non-stop intravenous antibiotics had not done a single thing other than make me weaker. I was greeted by a lot of inmates wearing orange t-shirts like in Bang Khen. They were all inmates and they said to me, "Do you want to stay downstairs, but you will get no help, or go upstairs and get help from other inmates?" I chose to get help. Even getting off the floor was a difficult chore. 3 inmates carried me and my wheelchair up 2 small flights of stairs and then pushed me along a landing. I got out of the wheelchair, and my foot was still painful but nowhere near what it was like at Bang Khen. As I walked into the room, which to describe it, the main area was about 60 feet in length and maybe 20 feet wide, and there was at least 100 people in there. As you walk into the cell, there were toilets to the right and a large water trough, something for the inmates to pull water out of to wash. It all seemed a clean environment, and the head of the cell, a Myanmar person called Jay, was friendly and smiling. He also had a few sidekicks, and they were okay too. Jay put me by the bars so if needed, I could get to my feet by using the bar to climb. I pointed out to Hamd, who was Jay's sidekick, that they had left the cannula in my arm. He said, "You see nurse tomorrow." The room also had a pipe going into a water machine with filters. The machine either gave you hot or cold water. Each water was drinkable, and it was right by my feet. I think in the cell I had the best place to stay. My place to sleep was just to the side of the entrance to the cell, right in front of the bars, which was a massive help to me because when I needed to get up, if there was no one there to help, I could lift myself up. I was so weak at this point, I just had those few options. There was a Kuwaiti man who slept in a side room with a few other young men from Myanmar. He gave me a big handful of packs of Oreo cookies and several sachets of Nescafe instant coffee. I thanked this man for his kindness, and he shook my hand. He seemed very popular in the cell. He was always giving the young men cigarettes and chocolate. The only real bugbear in the room was the fact that the TV stayed on 24 hours a day with the volume always on, and the lights in the room were blinding. I had to use one of my small towels, which I was allowed to take into the cell, to cover my eyes to get any sleep. I also found that during the night when I was trying to sleep, there would be a small gathering of Myanmar people who liked watching TV but slept in the bottom part of the cell, maybe 20 feet away. This was so annoying because they would stay up literally all night to watch TV. There was a young man from Myanmar who seemed very slow and not really with it. He was by the trough eating, which is something you should not do. He left his noodles right on the ledge of the trough, and when Jay realized that I heard the almightiest crack around the guy's face, followed up by several more. As this guy was speed marched out of the bathing area, several others who would help Jay out started smacking him around the head. He must have been hit around the head a good 20 times. I could not believe it. This guy had severe learning disabilities and was on medication. The thought of constant smacks around the head was horrifying to me. This was their method of teaching you to get out of bad habits, but with this guy, it never worked. This happened to him every day, and he never learned once. After seeing the nurse downstairs, who I needed to be carried to, she just dressed my wounds and said she was not willing to touch my cannula in my arm. This really shocked me as they should stay in your arm for a maximum of 72 hours. She said that when you go back to the hospital, they will take it out, but when I asked when I would be going back, she said just for a checkup in maybe a week or longer. At this point, I was shocked. She just got medical tape and wrapped it around my arm several times to secure it. Before back in the UK, I had spent 4 nights in the hospital in 2017 and knew the importance of changing it every few days. So, I went back to my cell and told Jay about my cannula, and he said, "Why don't you see the doctor in the cell?" I was like, "What doctor?" He said, "An inmate from Myanmar, a surgeon." This man, who came over to me and introduced himself as Kong, was a metafacial surgeon from Myanmar and had his full degree. Kong was very feminine looking. My initial thought was that he was gay, which did not bother me, but it turned out he was married with a young daughter. He was food shopping in a Bangkok market when immigration got him and arrested him. He had to leave Myanmar without ID or a passport because he would have been massively persecuted by the government there, as he worked for the previous government and had to escape to Thailand as soon as he could. He said he was not willing to take it out because of the lack of medical equipment and sanitation in the cell. I just smiled and said, "Okay, I understand." Kong became my best friend in there and is the only person I still talk to know that I am back in the UK. I talk to him all the while on Facebook. If you had nothing money-wise in the cell, you slept on the solid concrete floor, had the choice of drinking hot or cold water, and were fed 3 times a day with rice and cucumber soup on a metal tray. I would say 70% lived like this and had no way of changing their circumstances. On the other hand, if you had money, You could sleep in a private room and eat any food you wanted. Like in other places such as Pattaya Jail and Bang Khen, you could keep your phone for a price of 1,200 baht a day. But here, there were different things happening that set it aside from the other places. The half-dozen Chinese men in the cell next to us were having a completely different experience from the rest of us. They would be brought large coffees from local artisan coffee shops in Bangkok each day, each coffee in a 1-liter large plastic cup, looking expensive. Instead of rice and cucumber soup, they had KFC every day and ate what they wanted. They all had their phones on them and wore Rolex watches on their wrists. At night, they were even allowed to walk around the yard for a couple of hours each night. I was informed by Jay that this cost 1,000 baht per night. When their night was close to being over, they would have large, thick mats brought to their cell to sleep on. They also had young massage boys staying with them to massage them anytime they wanted. The young men from Myanmar jumped at the opportunity to get these jobs. It was a complete and utter different experience for these men. Other boys in my cell told me they were in for IT crimes in the IDC and could not go back to China because they would be locked up by the Chinese government. So even though they had a lot, they were in complete limbo and seemed to me to be there for good. The biggest currency for trade in the cell was cigarettes, and for me, a non-smoker, they were the worst. The air in the room looked like it was in a smoking room. It was horrendous. I must have passively smoked a pack of 20 cigarettes a day for the whole duration there. I hated every second of it. At the back wall of the cell, there were 5 African men, 4 were Nigerian, and 1 was from Cameroon. The Cameroonian man had money because he always had his phone and would spend every waking hour on it each day, literally 15+ hours. In the odd time he wasn't on it, he would lend the phone to his Nigerian friends so they could call family. Every day, the Myanmar inmates who worked to communicate between the cells and the Thai people running the facility would bring in a large carrier bag of drugs that were shared among the over 100 people in our cell. The drugs for me every day were antibiotics for my foot, a few more tablets for the pain I was in, and vitamin tablets. The rowdier inmates in the cell were clearly given something stronger than vitamin tablets because after taking them, they would be subdued and far more lifeless than before taking the pills. Every day at Suan Phlu, we would wake at 7 a.m., and breakfast would be served at 7:30 a.m. This meal, like lunch and the evening meal, consisted of rice and cucumber soup, which seemed to me to be about 400 calories max, nowhere near enough. On Thursdays, there would be a special treat as we would get a piece of fish, which was a nice change. After lunch each day, Jay would make half the cell walk to the other side of the room so one half could be cleaned. Then, 5 minutes later, the other half would be cleaned. The floor always seemed clean because of this routine. After our evening meal, there was no lights out time. The TV would stay on all night, making it difficult for me to sleep. I often had to cover my face with a towel I brought with me to block out the strip lights on the ceiling. Most of the young people in the cell stayed up all night watching TV. There were 3 from Myanmar who sat right at my feet and smoked all night. I hated it, it was horrendous. Because many people stayed up all night, they would sleep all day. On this day, a Chinese lad, no older than 20, when the evening meal was being served, was supposed to be awake and alert. The cell leaders liked everyone to be this way before feeding. The Chinese lad clearly did not want to get up, so Jay and a few of his sidekicks really laid into him with big boy kicks and punches, like you would see in an English pub when it kicks off. 3 of them were properly laying into him. At this point, all 5 African lads jumped up and really started ripping into Jay and the others. I was stunned. I had never seen anything like this since my total incarceration. The Africans were loud and aggressive towards Jay, and they stopped the beating of the Chinese lad instantly. The shouting between the Africans and the cell leaders lasted a good 10 minutes, which doesn't sound long, but I had no idea how that was going to turn out. One evening, about 9 p.m., just before the cell got locked down, our cell, already snug with about 120 occupants, saw an influx of Myanmar people caught working illegally at a company. Suddenly, our cell went from 120 to 150, which was absurd. We were so close together it was insane. If you got up in the night to go to the bathroom, you'd literally have nowhere to sleep when you returned. I had mentioned before that a UN charter stated there should be no more than 50 in the cell, and now there were 150. It was stupid beyond belief. With hundreds of blankets in the cell, any fire would be catastrophic. I don't see how anyone would have survived it. The Thais simply did not give a fuck, but to be honest, we rarely saw them. Instead, it was the orange-shirted Myanmar people fetching and carrying. When money was handed over, the Thais were never seen dirtying their hands with that. It was always the young boys. Proving that this whole situation was like a business and pinning it on the Thais would be very difficult. They had it well perfected. The next day, a lot of the regulars in the cell left by car back to Myanmar, which freed up about 20 spaces. Most days, I would sit with Kong and go through the only English book he had, Awakening the Giant Within by Anthony Robbins. For each word or sentence, I would go through it with him, and he was grateful to the point where he would give me 2 packets of spicy ramen noodles each day to fight off the hunger pangs I was getting. Even with my illness, my appetite came back. One of the days, a few Brits arrived, but they were not visa overstays like everyone else in the IDC. They were from prison and were spending their last few days in Thailand there. One guy, Stephen, was a real character from Milton Keynes who had been given a 25-year prison sentence by the Thai courts for drug smuggling cocaine from Bali. He had served 6 years of his sentence and, under the new king, received a pardon instead of doing about 18 years and getting the rest of for good behavior. He just did 6. He had the most awesome bedroll made up of about 6 blankets, which looked very comfortable. He went into detail about being set up by his business partner, but honestly, that didn't seem likely. Stephen had a book, The Count of Monte Cristo, which he kindly gave to Kong when he left. I had spoken to the British Embassy several times by this point, and they knew I had 0 money, both here and in the UK. They told me they would pay for my flight home, but I would have to pay the Home Office back. They would keep hold of my passport until the debt was paid in full. Most people with their own money to go home took no more than 30 days to be processed. Because I was broke, and reliant on the UK Embassy in Thailand, it would take longer. I was pleased they had informed my mum and dad that I was okay, and they had told them about my foot and my hospital stay. With well over 100 people in the cell, and by and large all young men, there was a lot of hugging and cuddling happening openly. I never saw guys in the cell having intercourse, but at the same time, it would have been impossible to hide. Maybe around the corner in the wash area, but I think that would have been stamped out, and the people doing it would have been severely punished. My weight when I was arrested was 106 kilograms. When I went downstairs for my dressings to be done, I asked if I could weigh myself, and the dressing nurse said okay. I had gone down to 86 kilograms, a weight I hadn't been since I was 23, and now I was 48. I couldn't believe it. When I looked at my unshaven face in the mirror, I looked about 60 years old. The illness and the few months of antibiotics had really taken their toll on my appearance. I looked just awful and felt even worse. The only silver lining to all this was that, because I was on the floor for nearly 24 hours a day with my legs level with my heart, my legs had massively healed from the open wounds I had, which numbered about 10 on both legs and were all painful. Now, I had just 2, and they were both very small. I had had these injuries since 2019 when my lymphedema really started affecting my legs. I also noticed that with prolonged illness, being on the floor all day, coupled with my low blood pressure, I got some truly unpleasant dizzy spells that would affect me many times a day and never went away during my entire stay. Because of the lack of enough food, I started to feel hunger all day and night, something I had never experienced in my entire life. To go hungry was a truly awful experience, one I would not wish on anyone ever. I had several documents arrive from the British Embassy which I had to sign an agreement to pay them back for the flight, which for one way was just under £800, and the flight was scheduled for January 12, 2023. This made me feel the happiest since being there because now I knew I would be going home and had something to really look forward to. I just had my birthday, Christmas, and New Year to get through, and then I would be back in Blighty. The morning of the 23rd of December would have been just another normal day in the IDC if it hadn't been for the fact that it was my birthday. I was 49 years old and stuck in the most miserable place possible. I told only Kong about my birthday, So when the inmate working for the Thais came around with a huge wicker basket for anyone with money to purchase snacks or sandwiches, he bought me a battered piece of fish to celebrate. And I'm not going to lie, even though I was very hungry at this point, the fish tasted like heaven. We sat together all day, and Kong, who was a very bright guy, could see how low I felt knowing my birthday and the Christmas and New Year holidays were very close. The fact that I had the January 12th date to go home didn't seem to make much difference to cheer me up that day. On Christmas Day, Kong decided to pay to get his phone back. He chose a half-day payment of 600 baht, where he gets the phone at 5 p.m. and gives it back 12 hours later. I didn't know my login for Facebook, so I used Kong's account, found my dad's profile, and sent a few messages, hoping if he saw them, we could have a live video call conversation. However, nothing materialized because he wasn't getting my messages in his inbox on Facebook. I went through Christmas Day and New Year okay, but it really did make me feel miserable, coupled with always being hungry, which was a real pain in the backside. I've said before our room was 60 feet in length. At the bottom of the room where Kong slept was the hottest part, a full 6 degrees hotter than where I was. It also housed the people with the least. It was not uncommon to see people in that part of the room without even a single blanket to sleep on. The people staying there would break their necks to do small errands for a packet of Oreo cookies or a cigarette. In the middle of the room, everyone had blankets and didn't need to do small jobs or beg for cigarettes. They also had enough for the odd packet of noodles to have with the rice and cucumber soup 3 times a day. In the part of the room where I lived was the cell leader Jay and his sidekicks where all trading and commerce took place. It also had great air circulation so that some mornings at about 5 a.m., it would get a slight chill in the air, especially sleeping directly under large, powerful ceiling fans. Just around the corner from where I slept was a small private room that cost 1,500 baht a month to sleep in. Each room was about 15 feet by 15 feet and only had 5 people sleeping in there, providing loads of space if you had the money. Several days before I was due to go home, the Thais brought us a large apple each and a large bag of broken biscuits. Jay and a few others distributed everything fairly among us all. The apple was a solid 10-10, delicious to say the least. I wolfed it down. The biscuits were a little crap, so I made them last a few days. I went down for my appointment with the nurse to change my bandages and found out she was on holiday, so instead, I had this guy who clearly was not a nurse. Not only did he dress my very swollen left foot poorly, but he also informed me that the bandages needed to stay on for 1 week. Within less than 12 hours of being back in the cell, the bandages were loose and dropping off my foot. My foot at this point was so swollen, and the top part of the abscess was now an open wound that was wet all the time, which scared me because an open wound before had led me to a several-day hospital stay back in 2017. I felt so uncomfortable now and really yearned for the days to pass. Usually, when we eat in the cell, I always noticed that we all ate off metal trays, but the 5 African guys always ate from their own bowls. Their bowls would always have huge amounts of rice for each one of them. Today, though, the server, who was Thai, gave them what the rest of the room was getting, and they just went nuts. They were so loud and aggressive, especially towards Jay and the server. For a solid 15 minutes, they berated them both for the small portion size. I don't know if the server got up in a bad mood, but he was regretting it now. I don't remember it happening again to the 5 Africans. So, my last nurse visit was due, and I went down to see the nurse back from her holiday. She started to prepare something different. She had a large syringe and a thick needle. I said, "What are you going to do with that?" Both of us looking at my massively swollen foot, she said, "I put needle in foot and suck out all the pus." My mouth nearly bounced off the floor, and touching around where the open wound on the top of my abscess was incredibly painful. I quickly said, "No thank you, I have had it at this point for 2 months. 2 more days won't make any difference." She said, "Okay," and as I started walking in the direction of the stairs to my cell, she said, "Also, these are yours." The Thais had bought me some sandals because of my swollen foot. They were the only things I could get on. I thanked the nurse for what they had bought me and took them to my room. It was the day before I left, the 11th of January. The whole day I was in an amazing mood, knowing 1 more sleep and I was going home. I tried to barter some razors because I had not shaved since my incarceration, and I had a full-blown beard that was itchy and scruffy, but I failed. They did not want me using their equipment on my full beard. I spent most of the day talking to Khen, going through his new read, The Count of Monte Cristo. This took more explaining to Khen because it was more complicated than the Tony Robbins self-help book he had, but I enjoyed sitting and doing this with Khen. At the end of the night, I always got my head down about 11 p.m., and Khen always used to stay up until about 3 a.m., so I knew I would not see him again when I got up at 6:30 a.m. and left the cell at 8 a.m. He simply did not stir until about 11 a.m., so I shook his hand, and we said goodbye to each other the night before. He was very happy for me. Khen himself had a sponsor on the outside, but that was all going through and would take months to get finalized for his release. At this point, he had been in the IDC for 6 months, all that time in that same cell. The next day, I slightly lay in and did not get up until 7 a.m. I got up, showered, put on clean clothes I had kept, and put my trainer on my right foot and my sandal on my left foot. It just about fit with the bandages on my foot. I already had everything ready the night before, so nothing needed to be packed away. I was ready to go by 8 a.m. I just sat there and waited until they came for me. Chapter 11. Heading back home. So, 2 of the orange shirts came to collect me. They walked me downstairs where there were another 6 people waiting, the UK lads and 3 from other Asian countries. I noticed that all the Asians waiting had suits on and were smartly dressed, while all the UK lads just wore jeans and t-shirts. All 3 of the UK lads, made up of a London lad, a Yorkshire lad, and another from the Midlands like me, were very angry about something. I sat with them and asked what was wrong. The 3 had been in the same cell while they were there. They said the night before, they were transported to somewhere else and made to wait all night without food or water for 18 hours. They were fuming because initially, a Thai officer male had been playing football with his friends and then just left them there all night. They were all starving and dehydrated, and said the changing room had spit everywhere and was very unhygienic. They were giving all the Thai immigration police hell. I was thinking, don't do enough so they don't let you go. They were that irate. At about 10 a.m., they told us to get our belongings and go outside. All 6 of us got into a minivan and started the drive to Suvarnabhumi Airport, which is Bangkok's biggest airport. For the whole 40-minute journey, the 3 UK lads did not stop running everything about Thailand down, but still saying they still loved it here. Strange, because I could not be happier leaving but was gutted knowing I was leaving a country I love. When we arrived at the airport, 2 of the Asian guys got out first and went straight into the terminal. I think they were in a hurry for their flight. We waited in the van at the terminal for 30 minutes before being told to get our stuff and follow. At this point, I was told it was a long walk and I might need a wheelchair, which I agreed to. We stood there in the large terminal waiting for at least 20 minutes, but nothing arrived. So, I said I would walk and started the trek on foot to where they were going to keep us for our flight home to Heathrow in the UK. The walk seemed to take about 30 minutes. They led us to an overly air-conditioned corridor and told us to wait there for our exit processing. At this point, the 3 UK lads, who had not eaten for close to 20 hours, were saying that we needed food and were very unhappy. The Thai immigration staff made it clear, you are not leaving this place until you go straight to your plane, and that is final. The officer said they could fetch our food if we were hungry, but we were not to go anywhere and fetch anything ourselves. At this point, the London lad was really ripping into the immigration police, calling them every name under the sun, running them and Thailand down relentlessly. He simply did not care. I was thinking, dude, if you carry on like this, you're going nowhere, but he did not care. The immigration staff told us all to go into their office where they examined our travel documents. For me, it was a single-page blue UK passport, good for only one journey. The complaining by the London lad continued in the immigration office they took us to, and they said they did not care, adding, let's be clear, you got in trouble with us, not the other way round. Once processed, they told us to go back into the corridor, which we all did. At the same time, a small Indian man walked past with trays of food. We asked if he could spare anything, and he very kindly gave us each a tray. It was a very nice Thai curry with some fruit, which stopped all the complaining. I was so weak after my walk and the other drama of the day that I got my head down for about an hour on the plastic chairs. This time, they called a young man to arrive with a wheelchair, which took about 20 minutes. Once he arrived, he wheeled me to our terminal, which took another 20 minutes straight. I was so glad of the help instead of walking because I really didn't think I had the energy for it. All three of us, once at the gate, were getting massive amounts of looks from all the other passengers, being escorted by Thai immigration police, and with me being wheeled about in a wheelchair. People seemed very curious. We were all made to sit in a row on the plane for the journey home, with strict instructions not to be served alcohol. It was the longest single flight I have ever had, going back west. It took 11 hours and 30 minutes, and it was horrendous. God knows how people fly to Australia and put up with that. When I got back to the UK, getting through immigration and out of the airport took hours. I called my dad from Heathrow Terminal 2, and he said he had put £50 for my birthday money in my account, which I was blown away by. I got it straight out of my bank, went to Costa Coffee, and bought a latte and a baguette sandwich. I had to stay in the terminal all night because a company at Heathrow that can give people travel expenses did not open until the next day. The next morning, after sleeping on the benches in Heathrow Terminal 2, I went to Heathrow Travel Care and sat with a young lady. At this point, I had no coat, just a pair of sandals, and a t-shirt, and it was January 13th, and it was freezing. The young lady gave me a thick coat and £60 and got me a train ticket home to Staffordshire. When she escorted me to the train station, I looked like the scruffiest person you've ever seen, and I was a sorry sight. I got on the train and spent the next over 2 hours going back to my town. I had called my dad to come and pick me up at Rugeley Trent Valley Station. As soon as I got back to my parents' bungalow, my dad said, "Drop your stuff, you're off to the hospital." Both of my parents were horrified at how I looked with my shabby beard and weight loss after total incarceration for about 2 months. I went to Stafford Hospital and spent 3 hours waiting before they saw me. They took me to see a doctor and a nurse, who decided to transfer me to Stoke Royal Hospital. The journey was at about 1 a.m. the next morning. After getting there, I did not leave until February 1, 2023. While there, I had to have 2 operations on my foot and weeks of antibiotics to remove the infection. Chapter 12. My thoughts. Over my many trips to Thailand and Pattaya over a 20-year period, my interactions with Thai police and government have been non-existent. However, I have had plenty of interactions with Thai people where I know I have been duped, and there was nothing I could do about it. Nothing could compare me to the 3 places I stayed at: Pattaya Jail, above the police station on Beach Road, and both Khen and Suan Phlu immigration detention centers. I know that in any IDC, all use of smartphones is illegal, so to witness anyone with either 600 baht or 1,200 baht for half-day and 24-hour use initially shocked me. In hindsight, it may seem very corrupt and dishonest, but at the same time, it helps inmates communicate with the embassies of their own countries and talk to friends and family back home. As much as to say, the Thai authorities should have a system in place that allows anyone access to a phone for the same reason, but instead, they've taken the lazy way out: use your own phone and pay us for it. The maximum occupancy at Suan Phlu was supposed to be 50 for my cell, which, I was told, was laid out by a UN charter. So, why allow over 130? This seemed unnaturally cruel and an unpleasant situation to deal with. Sharing of items a few years before, when COVID was most rampant, would have been devastating. The Thai people in charge did not care and knew they were always in the wrong for allowing inmates to run each facility and rarely showing their faces to us. They were never seen handling any cash at all. Would this stop me from going back? To be honest, no. I will always love Thailand, its culture, and its people. Thai people are beautiful inside and out and have shown me real kindness over the years of my visiting the kingdom. But a system that has people in there for 6+ years for some of them is deeply broken. I know it's not just the Thai government at fault, the countries from which the inmates of the IDC come also to blame. However, there's a system where, after maybe a year at most, you are allowed to stay in Thailand while being processed. I did just 2 months in total, and it pushed my mental health to the max, leaving me starved, hungry, and depressed out of my mind. The violence in any facility was wrong, and the correct authorities should be held accountable for that. I heard horror stories from the trip from Suan Phlu to the airport on the way out, about the same facility I was in, but I can't talk about them because I did not witness them and can only speak about my own experience. I hope what I have written opens people's eyes to what really goes on in this country. For goodness' sake, keep your nose clean in Thailand, because any punishment is severe, by John to say the least, and you might also get blacklisted from the Kingdom of Thailand.